While spending a few days in Thessaloniki, Greece, I was able to take a day trip to see Mount Athos. The day started nice and early, and I purchased some breakfast that, if I'm being honest, tasted like chocolate-covered birdseed. Little did I know that if I had just waited to purchase my breakfast, I could have purchased it from this older entrepreneurial gentleman who knew right where the tourists congregate to catch their transportation to their day trips. The day trip had an early start because it required a roughly 2-hour drive from Thessaloniki to a town which I will do my absolute best to pronounce, Ouranoupoli. So why exactly would someone want to see Mount Athos? Well, Mount Athos is a peninsula in northeastern Greece, and it is part of the larger Halkidiki Peninsula. Lots of fun words today. Mount Athos is an autonomous monastic state within Greece, known as the Autonomous Monastic State of the Holy Mountain. Of course, when I use the term monasticism, I am referring to a religious way of life where individuals dedicate themselves to spiritual work, often living in seclusion or within a religious community. And if you did not know, monks take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience so they can dedicate their lives to spiritual pursuits. Once we made it to Ouranoupoli, it did not take me long to do some shopping, but I could not resist getting a small cross with Jesus and a bracelet that had been made by one of the monks on Mount Athos. As a region, Mount Athos has been a significant center of Eastern Orthodox monasticism since the 9th century. Mount Athos also received the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation in 1988. The area is self-governed by its monastic community under the spiritual jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. There are 20 monasteries on Mount Athos, along with some smaller groups of monks and hermitages. Approximately 2,000 monks live on the peninsula, and they are dedicated to a life of religious devotion. As you may or may not have picked up on, I mentioned that this was a trip to see Mount Athos, but I was not able to actually step foot on the property. Women are strictly prohibited from entering Mount Athos, and this is a rule that has been in place for over a millennium. The male-only policy is rooted in religious tradition, and it is strictly enforced. Men are allowed to visit Mount Athos, but they must obtain a special permit to enter the region. The number of daily visitors is capped. However, there is a maximum of 100 Orthodox pilgrims who can visit each day, and then an additional 10 non-Orthodox visitors. Monastic life is deeply rooted in prayer with a strict schedule of daily services. The monks lead a self-sufficient lifestyle, and they engage in farming, fishing, and crafting. Mount Athos is renowned for its rich Byzantine heritage, including art, manuscripts, and religious relics. The monasteries are also famous for their iconography and frescoes, which are considered masterpieces of Orthodox Christian art. Timekeeping within some of the monasteries follows the Byzantine liturgical tradition, beginning the day at sunset. In addition to engaging with things like farming and fishing, the monastic community participates in economic activities such as winemaking, honey production, and crafting religious items, such as the beautiful bracelet I purchased. Speaking of my bracelet, I think every single shop in the town of Ouranoupoli had these for sale. And of course, Ouranoupoli was the starting point for this roughly 3.5-hour cruise. These knotted bracelets are made by monks, and they are known as komboskini, or prayer ropes. These bracelets are traditionally used in the Eastern Orthodox Christian faith for prayer. Each knot represents a prayer, often the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The bracelets are hand woven using a special technique involving complex knots, and of course, those knots are tied with specific prayers or blessings. So, how do these prayer ropes get from the hands of the monks on Mount Athos to tourists like me in the town of Ouranoupoli? Well, trade between the monks and the general public does happen through limited commercial exchange, where items such as religious artifacts, honey, wine, and handmade goods are sold to members of the general public. Of course, the no women rule still applies, and women are not able to directly engage in this trade process. Only men are allowed to enter the port of Mount Athos to initiate the trade process, and of course, this is to maintain the strict male-only policy. This allows the monks to interact with the outside world while preserving the sanctity and isolation of their monastic community. This entire cruise was about 3.5 hours long, so we cruised in one direction alongside Mount Athos for about 1 hour and 45 minutes, only to turn around and cruise right back. I ended up liking my prayer rope or komboskini so much that when I made it back to Ouranoupoli, I purchased 2 more. Unfortunately, one of them ended up being too tight. The sizing for the bracelets is a little bit complicated because you don't want to stretch them out too much, so that left me with 2 komboskini. I feel like these bracelets were made with love, and I really like that each one has a small cross on it. The cruise was an absolute blast. I almost fell asleep on the way back, and it's hard to believe that the whole thing lasted about 3.5 hours, but now I'm starving. Once back in Ouranoupoli, hey, I think I'm getting the hang of it. I purchased a euro for lunch, 2 additional prayer rope bracelets, which of course one of them did not work out for me, and then some gelato. I only have great things to say about the beauty of Mount Athos, Greece, but it's time to head back to Thessaloniki.